Pollock. Once again, you can be who you want to be. Hello, everyone. This is Tim Selden. This is our weekly webcast, Independent School Leaders Forum. And with me is my colleague, Dr. Lindsay Pollock, the provost of Sarasota University. Happy summer, everyone. I hope you had a lovely Independence Day weekend if you are in the United States. If you're not, I hope you had a lovely weekend wherever in the world you are. This week, we are continuing part two of the conversation we began last time, which is a real open-ended conversation about how the idea of a profession of independent school leadership evolved, and specifically how Montessori school leadership as a field of study came to evolve. And the reason why we think that's important is that most Montessori schools historically have been run by Montessori teachers who maybe don't really know how to run a business, don't feel comfortable with law, contracts, dealing with parents, money, bookkeeping, all the stuff, the busy work of running a school, especially as things get more and more litigious and more adversarial in terms of just the regulations we have to comply with in most of our parts of the United States. The other thing is many Montessori schools have been run by people who are former public school superintendents or principals or people who ran non-Montessori schools, and we noticed that that was a problem. And I would compare it to an order of teaching nuns, let's say the Sisters of Mercy, having a typical school that goes up through high school and saying, let's hire a Baptist minister who's a great educator to run our school. This person could do a great job. They might be able to do it. I think of Dr. John Moncure, who came out of the United States military, what they call the War College in Washington, D.C. And when he retired from that, he returned to his hometown of Camden, South Carolina. And next thing he knew, he was the headmaster of Camden Montessori School. And he did a great job. He didn't know anything about Montessori, didn't know anything about education. He did know how to organize businesses and how to run them and how to deal with all the things. And he approached it with kindness and humility. The bottom line is probably the most successful person running a school for the Sisters of Mercy would be someone who is really of the Catholic faith, who really sees this as a sacred duty and approaches it with humility and with understanding of what they do or do not know. Where things get into trouble would be the kind of things I've seen in my career, which is people that say to me things like, this school is Montessori today, but it probably won't be Montessori tomorrow. And the next thing you know, it isn't Montessori anymore. Or Montessori is a pain in the neck. And if it's so darn hard, why do we bother? So we've seen lots of Montessori schools end up being really great schools, don't get me wrong, but they become traditional academies or they become programs that are more oriented to project-based learning. They lose their Montessori roots. And we would argue that I don't care what kind of school you're running. I don't care if it's public. I don't care if it's charter. I don't care if it's private, non-Montessori, a prep school, a Catholic school, a Jewish. I don't care. The great job of a head of school is, first off, to be the primary spokesperson for the school. They have to speak the faith. They have to love the school, be able to articulate the vision, the philosophy, the character of the school better than anyone on the staff. And if they can't, they got a problem, which makes it very difficult for someone who's not a Montessori educator to lead a Montessori school. It's not impossible, but it's challenging. The second great task is to recruit great teachers. And if you're running a Montessori school, that's especially challenging because those teachers are incredibly hard to find. They're in short supply, and they don't like working for someone that's not a Montessorian. So the ability to go out and make the skies produce rain, in other words, to find these people and convince them we're the right place to come and then make them happy, keep them happy, turn them into a team. Let's face it, Montessori teachers, like all teachers, can be wonderful. They can be prima donnas. And one of our goals is to help people to find a way to relax, to appreciate the fact that we actually pay you to do what you want to do, to understand that not everyone wants to do this work. It is hard work. It is underpaid. Obviously, we need to do more to try to create more money, to pay more people to bring in the field, but you can only get so much. And most people don't understand what it costs to run a school. I will always remember a guy named Dave Weaver, who was one of the teachers at the Barry School. Great, great guy, dear friend, who said to me back, it must have been in the early 80s, you're charging $10,000 a year for every kid. By the way, today that same school is charging about 50. You're charging $10,000 a year. And we got 30 kids in the class, and you sure don't pay me and my partner $300,000. So what's wrong with this picture? And what he was getting paid was about $50,000 a year back then. Um, and he didn't understand where all the money went. And so again, you've got to understand the business side of running a school, whether it's for profit, nonprofit, charter, big, small, high school, preschool. There's a lot that goes into making a school work. And the costs just keep going up faster and faster. And so we're challenged because our country does not treat education with the kind of respect that it deserves. We don't tend to make the investment in our educators that they deserve. We do the same thing to social workers and ministers and pastors and nurses and doctors. I mean, well, maybe not doctors. The bottom line is people that are in the helping professions, and that's what you and I are in. We are in the helping profession. It is exhausting work, right, Margaret? It's tiresome. And we don't get paid enough. On the other hand, we can't get blood out of a turnip. And if we're running a private Montessori school, we're doing it because we don't have confidence that the local government is going to provide parents with what we think a great education should be. And in our country, citizens have the right to form private, non-government controlled schools or to choose to send their children to these schools. That's part of the nature of freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom from unnecessary government interference. And that's why private schools, non-public schools, independent schools, whatever you want to call us, why we exist. And so here we are. If we want to do quality, we got to do it our way. And probably a lot of you either run a school that was your work of art that you created because of your dream. I know, Lindsay, long before you got to Garden Oaks, you had your private school that you formed.
That's
And
right.
then
Yes, Tim.
I see Lisa Reiner on the phone, who's right now is running a little school. You know, it's her work of art, right, Lisa? So, I mean, we have to appreciate it. And part of our challenge is we have to go out and we have to be able to recruit teachers and find a way that they feel seen and heard and valued, and they get along with their compatriots and they're not fighting with each other. They're not playing my training's better than your training. Um, in other words, they're forming a family, a community. And then we also have to go out and recruit the right families. I don't care if you got an admissions director or not. We have to go out and find them. Every parent in the world wants to get to know the head of school. They love their child's teacher, hopefully. Sometimes they think their child's teacher is not adequately paid by the head of school, and they like to beat up. You know, me and the teacher beat up on the head of school. But the long and short of it is we got to go out and we got to convince parents that this is a great place and we love you and we see you and we love your kid and we're gonna meet your needs. That's the job. And not everyone can do that. If you were the Baptist educator trying to do it for the Sisters of Mercy or the local Jewish day school, you might have a hard time doing that well. Doesn't mean you're not a good person. And so that's the whole premise of today's workshop, that Montessori schools need Montessori leaders, and Montessori leaders are not necessarily the same as a Montessori teacher. And how did it all come to be? Because we were seeing one Montessori school after the other by 1970. All these schools that were formed 1959 to 1972 were crashing and burning by the middle of the 70s. And I mean, a lot of them were in serious trouble, or they were having divorces, they were breaking apart into two or more schools. Lots of bad things were happening. And there was no profession of Montessori leadership. Wow, that's a sermon from me. Anyone want to jump in here, like Dr. Lindsay?
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Tim. I think, one of the beautiful things about our country is that we have a very strong public school system, and we also have options for folks who may need more flexibility or have a desire to have their children in a specialty program that might not be offered by their public school, but we have lots and lots of choices in the United States when it comes to education. And everyone here is clearly a dedicated educator and spending time out of your day to come and join us for this conversation. I think the thing to remember is that as educators, we're building communities and we're centering the children and the families in our conversations and in our efforts, whether you're public or private. I think one of the dangers that we're seeing in education in general is the loss of humanity and looking at children as numbers um, and widgets. It's a lot of people talk about the factory model of education. And I had really thought we'd gotten past that as educators. And yet there seems to be, this heavy emphasis on, quantifying our efforts. And, think so often we see educators being demonized and education as something that needs to be fixed because, as long as education is broken, we've got lots of companies out there that are very eager to sell us worksheets and interventions to fix us as educators and to fix our children. And I think, Montessori, we all know, was way ahead of her time because her methods are tried and true and uh, we've seen proven results year over year over year, generation over generation. And, Montessori encompasses many of the best things that we hear about in education: the small groups, the differentiation, the interdisciplinary approach to learning, centering the child. And we see this in other methodologies and philosophies as well. I'm talking about Montessori because that, is my first love at this point in my life. I'm a Montessorian through and through, and have great respect for any educator who's doing this thankless, tiresome, and yet greatly rewarding, important work. So I think, we are at a crossroads. I was very encouraged yesterday, Tim, when we had our Lumen seminar, when I looked at the statistic about Gen Z and millennials. I believe it was 81% of parents who are Gen Z or millennials said that they are willing to pay extra um, to have their child in a quality educational program. So whether they're paying extra as a PTO member in a public school or in a private school, our Gen Xers and or pardon me, Gen Zs and millennials are understanding the importance of education, especially early education. And I'm hoping that perhaps we'll see this trend change, the trajectory of pay and maybe the admiration of educators will change because you know, as you said, Tim, the helping professions, those professions that have many times been occupied by predominantly by women, um, have been undervalued. We see this in nursing, social work, classroom teachers, where many times the woman's income was seen as that sort of supplemental or extra income. So we could pay that group of people less because we knew that was just, you know, the extra cash on the side kind of thing. But you know, that's no longer the case. This is important work that we're doing.
Well, again, I think that the amount of money that is going to the CEOs of some of these large corporations is ridiculous. However, the bottom line is it's how much money is flowing in as a result of what someone is managing or what they're doing. And in our case, while we no longer pay male teachers more than female, which once upon a time we did, um, we definitely have a situation where we have we don't have the political will to spend the kind of money that is needed. We also have really large administrative support systems in these public schools and in many private schools. I mean, I've seen private schools of 300, 400 students that have 17 people in the office. And in my mind, you can run a school with somewhere between one and three, maybe five at the extreme. So the idea of wasted money in bureaucracy is really critical. We also have the issue of, do Americans anymore think that our schools are really outstanding? For example, you made this statement, we have a wonderful public school system, really strong. We do, in the sense that it's the largest employer in most counties in America. Um, there's a lot of people that work for it. The education industry is a multi-billion dollar, if not trillion dollar industry, very close to the military complex. But we keep saying, wouldn't it be great if the Army had to go out and do a bake sale to get an aircraft? I mean, whatever the Army needs. Navy gets aircraft carriers, whereas schools have to beg, borrow, and steal. And reality is, money is just flowing out. It's just not flowing to the teachers. It's flowing to the people that build school buildings. It's flowing to the people who write textbooks. A psychology textbook in a high school these days is costing $250 to $300 a volume. But if I was in Canada, I'd get the same book for $50. And the only thing that's different is they spell color differently than we do. It's the same book. Um, so it's just the amount of profit in this industry is ridiculous. And we really struggle. I mean, in my mind, we who run schools, we need to be lean and mean and figure out how to spend our money where it gets the biggest impact. And in general, the best teachers in the world didn't have big fancy libraries and science labs and student unions and so forth. What they had was a tree or a hill or a pasture. And so the idea of trying to develop a mindset of parents that because we're not the wealthiest, let's say, private school in town, we don't have the huge football stadium that Snate Prep has, or the indoor swimming pool, that somehow what we do have is really wonderful, because what really counts is the classroom, the teacher, what the teacher is doing with the children. And so it's just a whole conversation of what the educational marketplace is all about, because people have all kinds of opinions about what is quality. For example, we were talking about Montessori being time tested and proven. Well, I would say that classical academies would argue they're time tested and they're proven. And they are. There's multiple ways to educate children. And so our question is, who will love us for what we are, and how can we be the best that we can be? Which
I
goes
think
back to the
that's so true, Tim. And we talked a little bit about that yesterday in our workshop with Illumin about making sure that as we're getting ready for the fall, that we're recruiting and enrolling the families that are the right fit for us, right? We can't be all things to all people, and not all families are interested in Montessori education. Again, the choice opportunity is really something that's unique to the United States. The amount of choice and the variety of choices that we have, and we want to be mindful as we're advertising, as we're onboarding, as we're um, touring families. I know I remember many years ago I had an assistant principal, and I was listening to her as she was touring a family, and I thought, she was promising them the moon and the stars and the sun and the everything underneath. And I had to speak with her later and say, I love your enthusiasm. I really appreciate you being so personable. And I'd like to give you a little feedback about some of the things I heard on the tour, because there are some things we just don't do and we don't have. So rather than saying, oh, that's a good idea, we should look into that, I can pretty confidently say we're never going to have a swimming pool here at the elementary school. Um, there are some things you want to just be upfront and accurate with your families at that beginning stage. Otherwise, they're going to keep coming back and saying, well, Miss Pollock said on the tour that she'd look into adding a swimming pool, or that this might be something you could do a fundraiser for, or getting people's hopes up for something that darn well isn't ever going to happen. So I think being, that clear, consistent communication from the very beginning. And that goes back to, the things that you were talking about, Tim, as far as characteristics, of an effective school leader. One of those many foundational characteristics is knowing how to set and maintain clear and consistent boundaries with fairness and equity. And then also being very clear and consistent in your communications, making sure that people are getting that clear, consistent communications, whether they're talking to you at the car rider line or at the PTO meeting. That it's better to, in my experience, it's better to say no than to waffle on an issue. And parents appreciate that. They just want to know, is it yes or no? If if it's something you sincerely think is a good idea and you want to look into, that's one thing. But I think, for example, with school dismissal times, um, those are set by my district. I didn't have and, I didn't have any choice about that. So for me to say to a parent, oh, well, we should look into changing school dismissal times, that's just never going to happen. So, um, you know, those are the kinds of things I think we navigate as leaders. And some of that takes practice as you grow and move into those leadership roles.
well said. So again, what I think we probably should begin to move into is the question of what does someone need to know to be a Montessori school leader, since today's topic is about Montessori leadership, but it's also the question of what does it take to be an independent school leader, whether you're not
Hmm.
Montessori. So let's take a thought about that. What do you need to know as a Montessori school leader? I mean, I've given a premise in my opening talk that a great school leader in the independent school world needs to be able to articulate the philosophy, the vision, of the school. You really sell people on the school.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean the teachers don't need to do it. Doesn't mean the secretary in the front office doesn't need. Everyone needs to do it. But if
Hmm.
the head of school can't do it, there's a problem. Um, and then they have to go out and recruit the right teachers. I don't care how many people are in HR. People work for the principal, and they got to love the principal, or the principal, whatever the principal pays attention to is going to blossom. Whatever the teacher ignores is going to die. And so principal is really critical in what kind of school you end up with in terms of the teachers. And in the same way, the right families. So what do you need to be able to do
You
to
know, Tim,
create?
one of the things that we've been really interrogating are the MACD leadership competencies. And the school leader competencies of the National Board or the National Association of School Principals. And the lists are quite comprehensive when we look at the kinds of competencies that an individual needs to have. I was like, oh my gosh, this person's going to I need to wear a cape and, have all the skills of a nurse and a business manager and facilities manager and educator as well. So I would say the very first skill that a school leader needs is the ability to build a strong team and to be self-reflective and to identify areas that they may not be an expert in. One of the things that I see happen all too often are schools that are opened by phenomenal educators who have been doing the work and are dynamite in the classroom and decide to open their own school but may not have the business acumen. To your point earlier, with your example of John, John's a person who knows systems, knows how to run organizations, and has that background. So putting together a team, you may not have to know everything. You may have to know a little bit about everything, and you're one person. So at the beginning, I know superintendents in Texas in very small districts, they're mowing the football fields, getting things ready for Friday night lights. They're doing it all. Some superintendents actually drive the bus in some of our smaller districts. And there's a limit to what you can do, how long you can sustain all of those activities. So it may very well be at the beginning you've got to do it all because you don't have the budget to hire all the folks that you will eventually need. But then looking at your parent pool and saying, hey, parents, these are the things I need help with. Is there anybody out there who's a CPA who could maybe help me, look at the books and do some strategic planning? One of the things that we're really interested in at Sarasota University is the idea of a Montessori Master's in Business Administration, an MBA, because we believe that there is, an opportunity to afford our educators, whether they're Montessori or independent school leaders, an education focused MBA program that really looks at the unique nuances of running a school. For example, one of the things that we see in public schools is that often the building is sitting empty for 3 months out of the year. So, what are the opportunities? Many school districts right now are struggling to make ends meet. Many independent schools are struggling to make ends meet. So, instead of leaving the building empty for 3 months out of the year, what would a summer school program look like? What would it look like to rent the space out to programs that would like to run their own summer camp? Maybe it's not a heavy lift for me as an administrator. Maybe it's a opportunity to lease the building and at least make some revenue during those down months that we might be out of session. So I know one of the things that we did at Garden Oaks was we did rent space in the summers to different programs that were offering, summer camps. And part of the rental agreement that we entered into was that they would provide scholarships. My school was Title One program, so we were serving at-risk students, whose family income was below the national poverty line. And so we said, as part of our rental agreement, we want to write in that X number of scholarships would be included for our families. And so it's another way to serve your community and help your bottom line without, having to ask your teachers to come in and work the summer months. Um, and we found that to be very successful. But again, looking at those business opportunities, taking off one hat and putting on another hat, um, and really exploring what does it look like to, be a little more creative and entrepreneurial about the spaces that we have, all of the assets that we have at our disposal.
Timothy is mentioning, do you want to just speak, Tim? So you've got something in the chat.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, okay, super. Yeah, I actually am kind of an ongoing member of SCORE, sponsored by the Small Business Administration, because I've kind of tried to do some entrepreneurial things on both on a small scale, and uh, it's kind of in and out. I'm back to teaching now full time. My school starts on the 27th for staff anyway. But I still have in mind a couple of entrepreneurial things I am going to be working on the side and hope to develop. And so I take some of the SCORE courses, and I have two mentors there to draw advice from on a couple of different things that I'm interested in. And one of the courses I took was on getting bank loans. I haven't done that, but one of their big customers for that area are people wanting to start childcare centers, and there's actually programs for that too. So anyway, I commend that to you for those for whom it might be pertinent.
I think that's a really important point, understanding what does it take to put together a loan package. Those are usually pretty large, almost looking like accreditation self-studies. Setting up a pro forma, understanding cash flow, um, being really comfortable with business law, even though you need to have a lawyer on call and use them regularly. Um, Dealing with issues of litigation and issues of ethics. Do you pursue a family that's behind in their tuition or that bolts and leaves you, high and dry with, canceling a contract? Do you take them to court? Is it worth it? There's so many different issues dealing with human relations. People that get upset, parents that feel that a teacher doesn't like their kid, teachers that feel like they can't get along with their coworker. I mean, just endless issues that come up in the course of a year. Again, the question is what makes it Montessori? And to what extent do we need Montessori teacher training, Montessori leadership credentialing programs? When we started the Montessori Foundation in 1992, there was no administrative training. There was a head of school section in AMS at that time. Um, there were the occasional workshops at conferences for it. I had introduced in the 80s ISM, Independent School Management, into AMS and AMI, and they really began to make a big contribution to the conversation about school leadership. but the idea of it being important that a school leader have formal training and formal certification really only began when the foundation was formed. That was the beginning of it. And we created the Montessori Leadership Institute, which some of you have taken courses of through the years. That was never an official training course. AMS, I don't remember, it must have been in the 80s or 90s, began to authorize its training programs to offer an administrator's course. And that's been going strong for years. They now have more and more support systems for school leaders. AMI has now got, again, thanks to my work, my friend Kathy Minardi at the Whole School Leadership Institute, there's now not only an informal leadership development program similar to what the foundation does, but there is a formal AMI recognition of being trained as a Montessori school leader. And then again, even earlier, there were master's degrees in educational leadership offered by various universities, starting, I think, with Xavier University's MED program in Montessori school leadership, then Loyola. Trinity did one with the Institute at Barry, the Institute for Advanced Montessori Studies. There's more and more of these programs running around the country. And so I just want to acknowledge in the bigger picture that the average person running a Montessori school is probably not formally trained and certified, but I think there is a growing recognition that this is legitimate. This is something that has value. And a lot of people who haven't done it yet are at least saying to themselves, gee, is it worth the money? Do I need it? Am I going to learn anything I don't already know? Because if you're out there successfully running your school, you're probably not feeling desperate. The real issue is as we retire, who succeeds us? And Carney Sando and other groups that are not Montessori based have been guiding non-Montessori leaders into the leadership of Montessori schools. And I don't think this has worked very well in a lot of cases. We see a lot of Montessori schools that are churning through leaders every few years, as opposed to people like my friend Renee Farkas, who's joined us on this call, who did not start as a Montessori educator, started as a mom and I think a business person, as I recall, Renee. But you learned on the job, and you did for a long time. And John Moncure, who again learned on the job. You, Lindsay, you learned on the job. You don't have to be a Montessori educator to become a Montessori leader, but that passion, that deep respect for the work, that desire to form a partnership with the teachers and to articulate for the parents instead of just say to your teachers, all right, I'm not a Montessori educator. You guys need to do the talking by yourselves. Everyone's got to be singing in a chorus. So we've come a long way from the early days. And we now have a Montessori University, which Dr. Pollock is the provost of.
Yes,
Anyone have?
I think, Tim, to your point, building community, we've seen a big shift in leadership, whereas, the old model is that top dog, I'm in charge, everybody listen to me, I'm going to call the shots. Um, don't anybody, cross me because I know it all. That sort of top-down leadership has really gone out of fashion. Now, that to say that, we talk more now about generative leadership, collaborative leadership, servant leadership. And that's not to say that there aren't some days where that person in the leader's chair has to make that tough call or that crisis call. Yes, there are times that we have to do things that may not be popular. However, we know we go farther when we move together. We depend now on the wisdom of the crowd. I know I used to always tell my staff, please, if you see me doing something wrong, please help me, stop me. I'm depending on everyone around me to help me, to guide me. If you've been in a meeting and you've heard about a policy and I haven't maybe I haven't gotten the memo yet, or I wasn't in that meeting. If something's changed, please tell me. If you think that something could be improved, bring that suggestion to me. I'm sure it's something I haven't thought about. I don't know all the answers, but we can do more collaboratively together, and that wisdom of the crowd, that wisdom of the group, is really so important. Um, I just think this leadership is a team sport. We so often used to think of leadership as sort of this solo journey, and being a leader is it um, can be lonely because you can't be everybody's friend, which sounds counterintuitive to being on a team. But even when, on a crew, when you're rowing, there's a captain. But the captain is there to maximize the efforts of everybody who's there rowing. And we're rowing together, we're rowing in unison, we're working together, and then we debrief after a race. The team gets together, we talk about the time, the results, how we did, and give that feedback, to the person, to one another. We congratulate each other for our successes. And we recognize also that we can always be doing better and improving. So it's truly a balance. It's not just one person doing it all. It shouldn't be, because that one person eventually is going to be exhausted and will burn out and will lose that talented individual. So working together, again, I say leadership is a team sport. And I would remind my teachers too in the classroom, we're all leaders. I'm counting on you to be a leader. I'm counting on you to be a leader in the classroom, to be the face of our school culture, to our parents, to our children, to our community, to be an ambassador for our school when you're out. Everyone is part of that leadership formula. I think it goes back to, Dr. Montessori's recognition that we we're all in this together. We're all connected, um, and we all impact each other.
So we've talked a lot about this. I wonder what your thoughts are, those of you who are with us today. What do you see as the things that are most important in a Montessori leader? What are the things you think need more support, for yourself as a leader or for the leaders you work with? What are the challenges? Is it getting capital, bank loans, as Tim said? Is it dealing with the Montessori board, which is usually not a Montessori board? Um, is it finding teachers? Is it getting the teachers you've got to do what it takes to compete in the educational marketplace? I mean, again, a lot of training programs produce very uneven results, and parents aren't going to spend 15,000, 20,000, 25,000, 35 for anything other than absolute knock dead excellence in their eyes. And again, different people think different things are excellent, but you got to compete in the marketplace. How do you do that? When you've got teachers that feel unloved by parents, feel like parents are more and more demanding than ever, feel that there's more and more problem kids in the classroom, more and more behavior problems, when we have a declining birth rate and fewer kids to recruit from, there are a lot of challenges out there. And just a few years ago, if you'd said, Tim, what should I budget the cost for a brand new building? I would have said $150 to $200 a square foot. Today, in most of the United States, I'd say it's probably now $500 to $600 a foot. That's a lot of money when you think that a building needs to be at least 10,000 feet. Just do the math. We're in the millions of dollars. Where's that money come from? So, what do you think?
I think my biggest um, challenge right now is to finding good teachers to come in. luckily I found a parent who is very loving and very Montessori-like to her children. And I've offered her, and she is going to go through the training, and I'm willing to pay because I'm willing to get those teachers that are well worth it. I've had postings everywhere, and I did find one teacher, but I think what I've learned in the last couple of weeks being on these is the fact that you've got to be a cohesive school. And I found that one teacher was like, that was her classroom, her school, and became very friendly with all the parents, almost in exclusion of everybody else. And that ends up being a huge problem. We don't have the problem anymore, but it was a very difficult time. So it's really understanding and not making, but having everybody work for the same goal, which is for the school, not for their individual classrooms. So that's something I've really, my ears perked up, and I
Yeah,
want to keep going to do
that's an
something.
important point, Margaret. The idea of a teacher is basically in it for his or her own classroom and into letting the other classrooms know they're just not as good as they are. I mean, I had a wonderful, wonderful teacher at my school who periodically would say to the other staff members, not everyone can love children the way I love them. And I almost made that person head of school when we were looking for a new head. It would have been a disaster. It doesn't mean that person wasn't a good head of school, but you can't really alienate people to that extent without blowback. So again, the trick is how do we do it? And the other thing you've probably seen, Margaret, is many times in a Montessori school, the teacher who's the most loved by the parents is that one who's the least Montessori. But she's really good at currying favor among the parents. Really good. And doing it's you and me parent against that evil board or that evil administrator.
Yeah.
A lot of things. Anyone else, any thoughts about what do you see as the challenges and where do you feel like we need to do more to support Montessori leaders? Renee, I see a hand up.
So I wrote a couple things down, Tim. One was, I think the most important, well, I think they're all most important, is having confidence to know how to lead your board. I think boards of independent schools, and particularly Montessori schools, are wonderful people. They're highly valuable, but they don't have a clue what they're supposed to do. And so building the confidence in the head of school as part of that training that we're talking about, to understand that their role is like the role of the teacher in the classroom, the prepared environment, and to lead the board. Doesn't mean you do it solo without really good communication, but building the confidence in the heads of school to be leading their board. My second one is for the head of school to really understand the value of partnerships with parents and bring in some PD to help teachers understand that. You know, many times people think, oh, if we do this partnership, we're giving away all our power and control. Well, we're not at all. And parent relationships will increase retention, and that we've got to come from the mindset that teachers aren't trained to work with parents, and we've got to help them from that perspective, because many parents can be difficult. We have difficult children, but we know how to work with them. We don't know how to work with parents. And then that creates a whole, other thing that happens in the school that you don't want to do, because parents can be your best admissions person, right? The third one I wrote down was having a really strong relationship with both the treasurer on the board and your business manager, and really understanding your budget and putting in the things that you need, and don't say, oh, we can't do that. First, put it in and see what it does to the bottom line, because sometimes it doesn't make a big difference at the bottom, and it can make a big difference in your programming. And lastly is having a mindset to really be supportive of the teachers. And somebody brought up shared leadership, that teachers should be involved we should be getting their input on decisions before we make them. Doesn't mean you have to do exactly what the teachers say, but let them be part of it so they understand the pros and cons of what's happening in our school. And I think this was something I learned later in my life, to get more input from the teachers. And they're pretty amazing problem solvers, and they understand the issues. And then when they understand it, they're willing to accept what has to happen. And we've got to give them more of a voice, which is about leadership. So those are my top ones.
Yeah, that's really good points. And the issue of partnership, and Renee and I have done a number of things together, and I know, Renee, you do a lot of stuff on your own on the idea of training faculty and the idea of rethinking the relationship between yourself as a teacher and your parents so that you don't feel like they're the problem, because they're not the problem. They're your best ally if you get them on board. But you do have to bend over, and you may have to make an investment in the relationship right from the beginning. So our playbook is all about some things that the office can do, but what Renee does is give a blueprint or a playbook of how to help the teachers to do the right things in the summer before and throughout the school year to develop those kinds of relationships with parents. It's all of it. The other thing, Renee, you just said was the idea of getting the teachers involved. And my bugaboo is always getting the students involved too. And of course,
Yeah.
getting the parents involved. But the idea of the more people that understand how to run the school and understand what the challenges are, the better. It's like in the military, you train everyone in the unit to do everyone else's job. Because if somebody is out of action, somebody's got to know how to run the communication system. Someone has to know how to do every job in the unit. So that idea of developing the future leaders of your school by bringing them into the process to the extent that they're willing to do it. Keep in mind, you're probably there long after they're gone home. You're doing things they don't want to be involved in. That's one of the things about being teachers. You go home and you don't have to think about it. You don't have to worry about all the troubles of the world. But on the other hand, there always are teachers who, when you invite them, they eagerly welcome the opportunity to be involved, to offer opinions, or to learn a new skill. And I think we just have to invest in our future leaders. Anyone else before we have to sign off for this week? So I do want to acknowledge again that over the years since the foundation was started, Timothy is saying that in Taiwan, there's a school that requires parents to get involved. And there are a lot of Montessori schools that have what are called covenants, Tim. And that whole idea of letting parents know what you expect of them and being serious about it, not using guilt, not throwing the kid out because the parent doesn't do it, but the idea that, if you're going to be here, this is what you can count on from us, and this is what we have to be able to count on from you. Some will, some won't. Doesn't always work. However, if you don't ask, you don't get. And so the whole idea of trying to create a culture of parents understanding that you need something from them too, whatever that is, whether it's show up on time or whatever. Bottom line is we now have a growing profession of training or development of school leaders that are much more effective than the MED I did years ago, which was great to be part of a public school district, but it was more about how does a public school district work, and what are the lines of authority and what are the governing laws that cover the funding and where does the funding come from. I mean, that's great, but that's not really what you need to run a school. That's really all about psychology and understanding how to get people on the same page and how to deal with conflict and how to sell and how to keep relationships going and understanding law. And there's so many different pieces to running a business or running a school. And places like Sarasota University, places like the Center for Guided Montessori Studies, their leadership program, the AMS and AMI leadership courses for school leaders. There's lots and lots of opportunities beginning to blossom, and it all is good. And one of the reasons why the foundation does these webinars is every week we make content for free so you don't have to pay for it. And so the idea is hopefully you learn something useful, or it reminds you of something that you've known for a long time. And hopefully you also have an opportunity to share your own thoughts and wisdoms, like Renee, like Lisa, like Margaret, like Tim, because we're all pieces of the truth, and we all have something to teach each other. So any last words from anyone? Bill, you've been totally quiet this week.
Tim,
Bill, we're
it's
going to
always
be.
good to see all these folks here joining us, and thank you for your participation at whatever level you felt comfortable today. Next week, we'll be here, same time, same channel. And I believe next week, Tim, we're doing case studies, right?
I don't remember for sure, but whatever you've got on our agenda is what we're doing.
All right, that's
We
what
will
I've
get an
got on our
email
agenda.
queued up for next Wednesday, letting everyone know what the topic is. I'm glad you got value out of Anandita. It's really great. Again, we all help each other to run our schools. I just got a call 5 minutes before we started from a Christian Montessori school in the South who said, we're having to close our doors because we keep losing kids. We can't hang on to them. And I've talked to the school off and on for the last few years, and they clearly have not figured out how do you compete with free public and how do you compete with non-Montessori Christian. For every school, there is a market. For every school, there is a solution, but it's not always easy. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of innovation to build these schools up from a scratch. Renee, when I first met you, you were operating out of a townhouse, and you built that school into a major institution. They all start small and they all steadily grow. And it's people like us who run them as a work of art, right?
That's right. That's absolutely right. Tim, I met with someone yesterday at a charter school, very large charter school. I won't say where, but it was a Montessori charter school, just over 500 students, closed their doors just this month. And going back to business practices, they'd gotten themselves into a lease. They'd built a beautiful campus. They'd fully outfitted all of their classrooms with a full complement of Montessori materials to the tune of, $20,000 to $25,000 per classroom. And they signed a lease that had a clause in it that it would increase by 3 to 5% annually. So they were paying over $55,000 monthly in their lease amount alone. It just broke the bank. So, back to our earlier conversation around the importance of having strong business practices and having somebody on your team who can advise the board and, the folks who are managing the money about the importance of these long-term decisions. So
Lots of things to talk about, including the simple
lots of
fact that
things. Yeah,
in business, it's often not obvious what the right answer is. You got to pay your money and you take your choice and you hope it's the right choice.
that's
All right.
right.
Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next week.
Thanks.